The evening sun cast long shadows across the gleaming windows of Le Chateau Manhattan, one of New York's most exclusive restaurants. Inside, crystal chandeliers sparkled above tables draped in pristine white linens, while the gentle clinking of fine china and soft murmur of conversation filled the air. James had been working there for 5 years, and over time, he'd developed quite an attitude. He wasn't just any waiter, he was Le Chateau Manhattan's most experienced server, and boy, did he know it. He took pride in serving celebrities, politicians, and business tycoons, often judging guests he thought weren't fancy enough for the restaurant's 5-star status. That Thursday evening started like any other. James was adjusting the silverware on table 12 when he heard a sudden buzz near the entrance. The usual peaceful atmosphere shifted as heads turned and whispers spread across the dining room. Through the grand doors walked Donald Trump, his presence immediately commanding attention in the space. James watched from across the room, his lips turning down slightly at the corners. He hadn't made a reservation, something that would normally result in a polite but firm turning away, even for celebrities. Tom, the host, was already leading Trump and his group to a table in James's section. Of course, James muttered under his breath, straightening his bow tie with an irritated tug. He'd seen Trump on TV, heard his loud speeches, and read about his controversial moments in the papers. In James's mind, this was exactly the kind of guest who would disturb the restaurant's refined atmosphere. Taking his time, James watched as Trump settled into his chair, speaking animatedly with his companions. The other servers glanced nervously between James and the table, knowing his reputation for being particularly cold to guests he didn't approve of. "James," whispered Lisa, another server, as she passed by with a tray of drinks. "Maybe I should take that table." There was concern in her voice. She'd seen that look in James's eyes before. "Absolutely not," James replied, his chin lifting slightly. "This is my section, and I'll handle it." He smoothed down his already immaculate jacket and began a deliberately slow walk to the table, making Trump's group wait longer than necessary for their initial greeting. What James didn't notice was the quiet observation taking place. Trump's eyes followed the waiter's movement across the room, taking in every detail of his body language and attitude. While James thought he was subtly displaying his disapproval, he was actually putting on quite a show for someone who understood far more about the service industry than the waiter realized. As James approached the table, he couldn't help but notice how Trump treated the busboy who was pouring water, with a genuine smile and a thank you. This small act of kindness didn't fit James's preconceived notions, but he quickly brushed it aside, determined to stick to his judgments. "Good evening," James said, his tone carrying just enough frost to be noticeable without being overtly rude. "Welcome to Le Chateau Manhattan. Though we usually require reservations." He let the words hang in the air. A subtle dig that didn't go unnoticed by the other staff watching anxiously from their stations. Little did James know, but this interaction would mark the beginning of a story that would be told and retold among restaurant staff for years to come, a tale about prejudice, humility, and the unexpected lessons life can teach when we least expect them. James stood at the table, notepad in hand, watching as Trump and his group settled in. The crisp white tablecloth rustled as they adjusted their chairs, the soft lighting from above casting warm shadows across their faces. Trump picked up the leather-bound menu, his expression giving nothing away about James's cold welcome. "Our specials tonight," James began, his voice carrying a hint of impatience, included truffle-infused lobster risotto and a dry-aged ribeye with roasted root vegetables. He deliberately spoke faster than usual, making it harder for the group to catch every detail. Trump looked up from his menu, making direct eye contact with James. "Could you please repeat that?" A bit slower this time. His tone wasn't angry or demanding, just calm and straightforward. This caught James off guard, as he'd expected a more confrontational response to his attitude. The other diners at nearby tables were trying not to stare, but their sideways glances showed they were closely following the interaction. A few regular customers who knew James's usual impeccable service standards seemed surprised by his current behavior. When Trump ordered a bottle of the restaurant's finest red wine, James couldn't help but add, "An interesting choice. Most of our more experienced wine connoisseurs prefer the French vintage." The slight was deliberate, implying Trump lacked sophistication. To James's surprise, Trump smiled and said, "You know, sometimes the best experiences come from trying something new. What's your opinion on this particular wine?" The genuine interest in James's professional opinion threw him off balance. This wasn't how he expected the interaction to go. Throughout the ordering process, Trump remained patient and polite, even as James continued his subtle jabs and prolonged delays. He noticed how Trump treated every staff member who approached the table, the busboy refilling water glasses, the junior server bringing bread, with genuine respect and warmth. When James returned with the wine, he made a show of presenting it with exaggerated formality, expecting Trump to fumble through the tasting ritual. Instead, Trump demonstrated a surprisingly sophisticated knowledge of wine, commenting on the bouquet and asking thoughtful questions about the vineyard. Other servers watched nervously as they passed by, some shooting warning glances at James. Lisa, who had earlier offered to take the table, kept finding excuses to walk past, ready to step in if things got out of hand. The restaurant's atmosphere grew increasingly tense as James's behavior became more obvious. What made the situation even more interesting was Trump's companions. They noticed James's attitude but followed Trump's lead in maintaining polite, professional behavior. One of them, an older gentleman with silver hair, seemed particularly amused by the whole situation, as if he knew something James didn't. As the evening progressed, James's attempts to demonstrate his superiority were consistently met with patience and professionalism from Trump. Each time James delayed bringing something to the table or made a condescending remark, Trump responded with a level of grace that slowly began to make James feel uncomfortable rather than satisfied. The other diners in James's section were receiving his usual stellar service, creating a stark contrast that was becoming more noticeable by the minute. Some of them, regular customers who knew the restaurant well, appeared confused by the obvious difference in treatment. Little did James know, but his carefully crafted display of disapproval was about to backfire in a way he never could have anticipated. As he walked away from Trump's table for the 10th time that evening, the restaurant's general manager was making her way across the dining room, her face bearing an expression that would soon change the entire dynamic of the night. The dinner service continued, with James finding new ways to make his disapproval known. As he approached Trump's table with their appetizers, he deliberately placed the plates with less than his usual grace. A drop of soup splashed onto the pristine tablecloth, not enough to make a scene, but sufficient to make his point. "Oh, my apologies," James said, his tone making it clear the slip wasn't entirely accidental. "Let me get someone to clean that up." He turned away, taking his time to find a busboy, though he usually kept cleaning cloths in his own apron for such occasions. Trump dabbed his napkin at the small splash, then returned to his conversation as if nothing had happened. His calm reaction only seemed to fuel James's determination to crack that composed exterior. The other servers watched in disbelief as their usually professional colleague continued his supple campaign of poor service. When Trump requested fresh ground pepper for his salad, James conveniently forgot to bring the pepper mill, returning only after the guest had started eating. "I assume you're still wanting that pepper?" he asked, his voice dripping with fake concern, though the chef carefully seasons everything to perfection. The wine glasses remained unfilled longer than usual, water wasn't replenished promptly, and every request was met with a slight delay. Yet through it all, Trump maintained his composure, engaging warmly with his companions and other staff members who approached the table. At one point, Trump asked about the history of the restaurant. Instead of sharing the usual proud story James told other guests, he gave a brief, uninterested response. "It's been here quite a while. Lots of famous people eat here." He turned away, missing the knowing smile that passed between Trump and his silver-haired companion. The main course arrived, and James made sure to mix up the orders slightly. "I believe you ordered the ribeye medium rare?" he said to Trump, knowing full well he had ordered it medium. When Trump politely pointed out the error, James acted put upon as he returned the plates to their correct recipients. Other diners were starting to notice the obvious difference in service. A couple at a nearby table, regular customers who knew James's usual standards, exchanged confused glances. The woman whispered something to her husband, both of them watching as James continued his performance. The restaurant's general manager had been keeping a close eye on the situation, her expression growing more concerned with each passing moment. She moved between tables, speaking quietly with other staff members, her usual confident smile replaced by a worried frown. As the evening progressed, Trump's table ordered dessert. James recited the options in a monotone voice, barely pausing between items, making it difficult to follow. When Trump asked him to repeat the chocolate option, James sighed audibly before complying. Just as James was about to serve the desserts, the general manager appeared at his side. Her face was pale, and she whispered something urgent in his ear. For the first time that evening, James's confident demeanor cracked slightly. The other staff members watched as the color drained from his face. The revelation she shared would change everything about this evening, and James's future at Le Chateau Manhattan. As he stood there, dessert plates in hand, the weight of his actions throughout the night suddenly felt much heavier than the elegant porcelain he was holding. The general manager's words hit James like a bucket of ice water. "He owns the restaurant," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "Mr. Trump bought Le Chateau Manhattan 3 months ago through his hospitality group. I just got the confirmation from head office." James stood frozen, the dessert plates growing heavy in his hands. His mind raced back through every snide comment, every deliberate delay, every small act of disrespect he'd shown throughout the evening. The elegant dining room suddenly felt too warm, too bright, too crowded. That's impossible," James stammered, his usual composure completely shattered. "We would have known. The staff would have been informed." But even as he spoke, he remembered the mysterious meetings, the new paperwork, the subtle changes in management protocols over the past few months. The general manager shook her head. It was kept quiet to maintain normal operations. Only top management knew. She glanced nervously at Trump's table. He's been visiting different properties, seeing how they run when staff don't know who he is. And you? She didn't need to finish the sentence. James looked down at the desserts he was holding, perfectly plated chocolate soufflés that were getting cooler by the second. His hands, usually steady after years of service, had developed a slight tremor. He'd worked so hard to build his reputation at Le Chateau Manhattan, and in one evening of misplaced judgment, he'd put it all at risk. Nearby, other servers who had noticed the interaction were trying to appear busy while stealing glances at the unfolding drama. Lisa, who had offered to take the table earlier, looked at James with a mixture of sympathy and "I told you so" in her eyes. The silver-haired man at Trump's table, who James now realized must be a senior executive, caught his eye and gave him a knowing smile. All those amused looks throughout the evening suddenly made sense. They had been watching, evaluating, seeing how their restaurant really operated when they thought no one important was looking. James took a deep breath, straightened his spine, and did the only thing he could do. He walked to the table with the desserts. Each step felt like walking through deep water, his legs heavy with the weight of his actions. He could feel eyes from every corner of the restaurant following his movement. As he approached, Trump looked up from his conversation, and for the first time that evening, James saw him not as an unwelcome intrusion, but as what he truly was, his employer. The man who signed his paychecks, who owned the very walls around them, who had witnessed every moment of James's poor behavior firsthand. "Your dessert, sir," James managed to say, his voice hardly above a whisper as he carefully placed the plates on the table. The usual flourish in his service was gone, replaced by genuine care and attention. Too late, he feared. Trump thanked him with the same polite tone he used all evening, but now his words carried a different weight. James noticed things he'd missed before, the way Trump's eyes took in every detail of the restaurant, how he noted the interactions between staff members, how nothing had escaped his attention. As James stepped back from the table, he realized this wasn't just about losing his job. It was about facing the consequences of judging someone based on preconceptions, about the danger of letting pride override professionalism. The evening wasn't over yet, but James knew nothing would ever be the same at Le Chateau Manhattan, if he even had a future there at all. The moment of reckoning. The restaurant's soft ambient lighting suddenly felt like a spotlight, burning into Jake's skin. He could feel the sweat forming on his forehead, tiny beads of moisture that threatened to betray his crumbling confidence. The gentleman he had been disrespecting moments ago was now looking directly at him, his gaze sharp and calculated. "Come here," the man said, not a shout, not an angry demand, just a calm, calculated invitation that carried more weight than any raised voice could. Jake's legs felt like they were made of lead. Each step towards the table became a battle against his own mounting anxiety. The other diners had fallen silent, their conversations dying down to hushed whispers. Some watched with a mix of curiosity and second-hand embarrassment, while others pretended to be deeply engaged with their wine glasses. "Sir," Jake began, his voice cracking slightly, "I can explain." But before he could continue, the man raised a single hand. It was a gesture that screamed volumes without uttering a word. "Stop, listen, think. What's your name?" The question was direct, almost clinical in its delivery. "Jake," he responded, his confidence from earlier completely evaporated. The bravado that had fueled his earlier comments now seemed like a distant, foolish memory. The man leaned back in his chair, studying Jake with an intensity that made the young waiter feel like he was being dissected. Those eyes, Jake now realized, weren't just looking at him, but through him. They seemed to be calculating not just the immediate moment, but potential consequences that stretched far beyond this restaurant. "Do you know who I am?" The question hung in the air, not as a threat, but as a genuine inquiry. Jake nodded, then realized a verbal response might be more appropriate. "Yes, you're Donald Trump." A slight smile, more of a smirk, really crossed the man's face. It wasn't a smile of anger, but of someone who had seen this scenario play out countless times before. "And do you understand the position you've just put yourself in?" The words were measured, each one deliberately chosen. The restaurant manager had appeared at Jake's side, his face a canvas of pure panic. Jake could see the man's hands trembling slightly, fully aware of the potential fallout from this interaction. In that moment, Jake understood something profound. This wasn't just about a disrespectful comment. This was about consequences, about professional boundaries, about the thin line between personal opinion and professional conduct. His mind raced. He thought about his rent, about the student loans he was struggling to pay, about his dreams of climbing the restaurant industry ladder, and in a split second, he realized how quickly those dreams could be dismantled. "I'm listening," Jake finally said, his voice now soft, stripped of its earlier sarcasm. What followed was not a lecture, not a verbal takedown, but a conversation that would become a pivotal moment in Jake's young professional life, a lesson in humility, respect, and the unwritten rules of the professional world. The restaurant around them continued to breathe, silverware clinked, glasses were refilled, but the energy had fundamentally shifted. One moment of unchecked emotion was about to rewrite everything Jake thought he knew about his career and himself. The falling dominoes. Jake's world crumbled faster than he could have ever imagined. What began as a momentary lapse in judgment became a thunderous avalanche of professional destruction. The restaurant manager's face was a canvas of pure dread. His trembling hands spoke volumes before he even uttered a word. "You're done," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the soft background music of the restaurant. Those two words carried the weight of a lifetime's potential. Within minutes, Jake found himself standing outside on the bustling New York street. The crisp evening air felt like a slap of reality against his burning cheeks. His pristine white shirt and black bow tie, once a symbol of professional pride, now felt like a mockery of everything he had just lost. His phone buzzed. Text messages from potential references began to disappear. LinkedIn connections grew silent. The restaurant industry in New York was smaller than most people realized, a tight-knit community where reputation spread faster than wildfire. Jake remembered his mother's words. She'd always warned him about his quick temper, about the importance of holding your tongue, especially in professional settings. Now, those words echoed in his mind like a painful prophecy. The next few weeks were a brutal landscape of rejected job applications. Each "we'll get back to you" felt like another nail in his professional coffin. Restaurant after restaurant seemed to know his story before he could even submit his resume. Whispers travel fast in the culinary world, and Jake had become a cautionary tale. His small apartment in Brooklyn became both his sanctuary and his prison. Rent was due, student loans were piling up, and his savings were dwindling faster than he could have ever anticipated. The gig economy became his lifeline, delivering food to the very restaurants where he once dreamed of working. What hurt most wasn't just the job loss. It was the realization of how quickly a single moment could unravel years of hard work and ambition. Jake had worked his way through culinary school, pulling double shifts, surviving on minimal sleep, all to build a career in the restaurant industry he loved. Now, that dream felt like a distant memory. The irony wasn't lost on him. His attempt to make a statement, to feel empowered by speaking his mind, had instead stripped away his power completely. Each rejected application, each uncomfortable conversation with potential employers became a painful reminder of that single moment in the restaurant. His friends tried to offer support, but he could see the hesitation in their eyes. Some suggested he should just move to another city, start over. But Jake knew the restaurant industry was interconnected. His reputation had spread far beyond New York's borders. Late at night, scrolling through job boards, Jake would replay that moment repeatedly in his mind. The sharp words, the defiant attitude, the moment he decided to let his personal opinions override professional courtesy. If he could go back, he would choose differently. But life doesn't offer second chances that easily. As months passed, Jake began to understand the true meaning of professional humility. Every delivery he made, every odd job he took, became a lesson in respect, in understanding that opinions are personal, but professionalism is universal. The restaurant incident wasn't just about losing a job. It was about losing a version of himself, the arrogant young waiter who thought he could say anything without consequences. And in losing that version, he was slowly, painfully learning to rebuild. His journey was far from over. But for the first time, Jake understood that sometimes the most expensive price we pay is not in dollars, but in opportunities lost and lessons learned the hardest way possible, the unexpected journey. 5 years had passed since that fateful night in the restaurant. Jake's life looked nothing like he had once imagined, yet somehow it was more fulfilling than he could have ever predicted. The restaurant incident had been a turning point, not the end of his story, but a brutal beginning. After months of struggling, Jake discovered a passion he never knew existed. Forced out of the traditional restaurant world, he found himself in a small coffee shop on the outskirts of Brooklyn, learning a different kind of service. It wasn't glamorous. The days were long, the pay was modest, but something had fundamentally changed in Jake. Where he once saw customers as obstacles or opportunities to showcase his wit, he now saw human beings. Each cup of coffee became more than just a transaction, it was a moment of connection. The owner of the coffee shop, an older woman who had weathered her own share of life's storms, saw something in Jake. She didn't know his past, didn't care about the whispers that had followed him through the New York restaurant scene. What she saw was a young man willing to learn, to grow, to humble himself. Service isn't about showing how smart you are, she told him one quiet morning as they prepared for the day. It's about making people feel seen, heard, respected. Those words became Jake's new mantra. He started a small blog documenting the stories he heard in the coffee shop. People's morning struggles, their quiet moments of joy, their unexpected conversations. What began as a personal outlet slowly transformed into something more. People connected with his writing, raw, honest, devoid of the sarcasm that had once defined him. The irony wasn't lost on Jake. The very thing that had destroyed his previous career was now becoming his greatest strength. His ability to observe, to listen, to truly see people had been refined through his most challenging period. Social media began to take notice. His following grew, not because he was trying to be viral, but because he was genuine. Brands started reaching out. Speaking opportunities emerged. The kid who had been blacklisted from restaurants was now being invited to discuss customer service, personal growth, and the power of humility. During this time, Jake never forgot that night in the restaurant. It wasn't a wound he carried, but a lesson he cherished. He'd learned that respect wasn't about agreeing with everyone, but about understanding that every person has a story, a perspective worth hearing. His mother, who had watched his struggle with a mixture of concern and hope, would often say, "Sometimes life's biggest failures are actually disguised opportunities." Jake now understood exactly what she meant. The coffee shop became more than a job. It became a classroom. Each customer, each interaction was a chance to practice the art of genuine human connection. He learned that true power wasn't in cutting remarks or witty comebacks, but in listening, in understanding. Years later, when people would ask about his journey, Jake would smile. He'd talk about that night in the restaurant not as a moment of shame, but as a pivotal turning point. The night that taught him the most valuable lesson of his life, that our greatest growth often comes from our most humbling moments. Life, he realized, was never about perfection. It was about adaptation, about learning, about understanding that every closed door might just be opening another, completely unexpected path.